The faint hum of the Silver Crescent's engines was drowned out by a sharp shake on Calvin's shoulder, pulling him from a restless sleep. His eyes fluttered open, blurry with exhaustion, to find Matlin's face hovering above him, etched with urgency. The dim light of the sleeping quarters cast harsh shadows across his father's furrowed brow. "Calvin, wake up," Matlin said, his voice low but trembling with barely contained emotion. "It's bad. The news. It broke last night." Calvin sat up, his heart thudding against his ribs. "What news?" Matlin didn't reply, just gestured for him to follow. Calvin stumbled out of his bunk and trailed his father to the common area, where the rest of the family was already gathered around the comm screen. Elvin sat hunched, her face pale and streaked with tears, while Carvin stood rigid, arms crossed, staring at the flickering broadcast. Amber was there too, leaning against the wall, his expression a mask of calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. The anchor's voice cut through the silence, cold and precise. Leaked reports confirm the existence of human bombs, individuals implanted with explosive devices by the APCF. The destruction of Thasset Station is now attributed to one such bomb, a girl named Ambry. Authorities warn that others may still be at large, posing a threat to galactic stability. Elvin let out a choked sob, pressing her hands to her mouth. "Ambry, oh, my sweet girl." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Matlin's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. Who leaked this? Who would put us all in danger like this? His anger was a raw, jagged thing, filling the small space with heat. Carvin's silence was deafening, his gaze fixed on the screen as if searching for answers in the static. His jaw tightened, a flicker of guilt passing over his features. Guilt he wouldn't voice, not yet. Calvin felt the weight of their eyes shift toward him, even if they didn't mean it to. "They're talking about me," he whispered, his throat dry. "I'm one of them. They're going to hunt me down." Amber pushed off the wall, stepping forward with a steadying hand on Calvin's shoulder. "You're not a bomb, kid. You're Calvin, and we're not going to let anyone take you." His voice was firm, a lifeline in the chaos. "But how did this get out?" Elvin asked, her voice trembling as she looked up. "We've been so careful." "Doesn't matter how," Amber said, his tone practical. "What matters is what we do now. We're approaching a fuel stop near an asteroid field today. We'll refuel, keep moving, and stay sharp. Calvin, I've got an idea. How about you join me in the cockpit? Time you learned how to fly this thing." Calvin nodded, clinging to the distraction like a lifeline. By mid-morning, the Silver Crescent was gliding toward the asteroid field, a sprawling expanse of jagged rocks drifting through the void. Some were small enough to ping harmlessly off the hull, while others loomed like silent titans, their surfaces glinting faintly in the starlight. In the cockpit, Amber sat at the controls, his hands steady as he guided the ship through the maze. Calvin sat beside him, eyes wide as he took in the array of levers, buttons, and screens. "Flying's not just about mechanics," Amber began, his voice calm and instructive. "It's about instinct. This here's the throttle, controls your speed. These thrusters handle lateral movement. And this big lever, that's your main engines. Got it?" Calvin nodded, his fingers hovering over the controls. "So, if I want to dodge something, I use the thrusters?" "Right, but you've got to anticipate, feel the ship's rhythm." Amber grinned, a spark of enthusiasm breaking through his usual reserve. "Here, take over. Let's see what you've got." Calvin's hands shook slightly as he gripped the controls, but he pushed the left thruster, guiding the ship into a gentle turn around a drifting boulder. "Like this?" "Perfect. "Now ease her back," Amber said, watching closely. "You're a quick study, just like Padro was." Calvin's breath caught at the mention of his brother. "You and Padro flew together a lot, didn't you?" Amber's smile softened, tinged with nostalgia. "He'd visit every 6 months growing up on Ganymede. He was my best friend, practically family. We'd sneak into the mining skiffs as kids, race them through the ice canyons until the overseers caught us. That's how I got to know you all so well. Padro wouldn't shut up about his little brother and the rest of you." Calvin managed a small smile, though his chest ached. What was Ganymede like? Cold, harsh, beautiful in its own way, Amber said, his gaze drifting to the stars beyond the viewport. "My folks were miners, worked the ice fields for water and ore. I miss them, miss the quiet nights, the way the moons lit up the sky. But I left to join the APCF, thought I could make a difference out here. Padro had his own chart to course in the Cartographers Guild, and we swore we'd have each other's backs." "Do you ever think about going back?" Calvin asked, his hands steadying on the controls as he navigated past a cluster of smaller rocks. "Sometimes," Amber admitted, his voice quieter now. "But this is my life now. Helping people like you, keeping the fight alive. Padro would have wanted that." Calvin nodded, a mix of admiration and longing settling in his chest. "I wish he was here." "He is, in a way," Amber said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've got his spirit. Now, let's try a sharper turn. Show me what you can do." The Silver Crescent had just banked a hard right around the asteroid field's outpost. A proximity alarm screamed to life. Amber's head snapped up from the console, his easy demeanor replaced by sharp focus. "Calvin, stay at the controls. We've got company." Calvin's pulse spiked as he scanned the screens, spotting 2 sleek pirate ships emerging from behind a massive asteroid. "Pirates?" "Looks like it," Amber muttered, his hands flying over the console. "Get us moving. Use the asteroids for cover." Before Calvin could respond, a pair of EMP missiles streaked through the void, slamming into the Silver Crescent with a bone-rattling thud. The lights flickered and died, systems shutting down in a cascade of warning beeps. Darkness swallowed the cockpit, leaving only the faint glow of emergency panels. "Damn it!" Amber cursed, slamming a fist against the armrest. "They've crippled us. Calvin, get to the cargo hold. Hide. I'll handle this." Calvin didn't argue, bolting from the cockpit as the sound of docking clamps echoed through the hull. He reached the cargo hold and wedged himself between 2 crates, his breath shallow and ragged. The air was thick with the scent of metal and fuel, but it couldn't mask the rising panic as heavy footsteps clanged onto the deck. Voices followed, gruff, menacing. "Goddamn good pickings, isn't it?" one pirate sneered, his shadow falling across the hold as he stepped into view. He grabbed Elvine by the arm, leering. "Pretty thing like you coupled with an APCF transport? We could have some fun before we sell you off." Elvin yanked her arm free, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Touch me, and you'll regret it." The pirate laughed, drawing a blade, but before he could act, Amber and Carvin stormed in, weapons blazing. Plasma fire lit up the dark, the sharp crack of plasma bolts mingling with shouts and the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Calvin peeked out, his heart pounding, helpless but desperate to act. The fight was chaotic, brutal. Amber took down one pirate with a clean shot to the chest, while Carvin grappled another, snapping his neck with a sickening crunch. The third pirate lunged at Elvin, but Amber intercepted, driving a fist into the man's jaw and finishing him with a blast from his pistol. Within moments, the hold was silent again, save for the ragged breathing of the survivors. The cargo hold of the Silver Crescent was a tableau of chaos, frozen in time. Pirate corpses littered the deck, their blood seeping into the metal grates, glistening darkly under the flickering emergency lights. The air hung heavy with the sharp bite of burnt wiring and the coppery tang of violence, the ship's hull creaking as it drifted free of the pirate vessel's wreckage. The fight was over, but its echoes lingered, a raw wound in the silence. Elvin stood near a stack of crates, her body rigid, arms locked around her torso as if she could physically shield herself from the memory of what had nearly happened. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her breath hitching in shallow, panicked bursts. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared at nothing, fixed on the phantom of the pirate who had grabbed her, his blade cold against her throat, his intent a violation she could still feel crawling over her skin. The terror of that moment clung to her, a suffocating weight that threatened to drag her under. Matlin appeared from the shadows, his face etched with exhaustion and a quiet fury that simmered beneath his calm exterior. His hands, stained with the blood of the man he'd killed to protect her, trembled faintly as he wiped them on his torn trousers. But his eyes were steady, locked on Elvine, and he crossed the hold with purpose, his boots silent against the deck. Without hesitation, he drew her into his arms, enveloping her in an embrace that was both gentle and unyielding, a sanctuary amidst the storm. "Elvine," he whispered, his voice a low, steady thread cutting through her panic. "It's over now. I've got you." She collapsed against him, her fingers digging into his shirt as a choked sob tore from her throat. The sound was raw, jagged with fear and relief, and Matlin held her tighter, his hand cradling the back of her head as she pressed her face into his chest. He didn't recoil from her distress. He met it head on, his touch a lifeline. "You're safe," he murmured, the words soft but firm, repeated like a mantra until her trembling began to ease. His calm was a stark contrast to the violence that had just unfolded, a beacon in the darkness she clung to. For minutes they stood there, the chaos of the hold fading into the background. Matlin's heartbeat thudded steadily beneath her cheek, a rhythm she latched onto as her own breaths slowly evened out. He said little, but his presence spoke volumes. His silence wasn't empty, but full of understanding, a quiet strength that didn't demand attention, but offered it freely. This was Matlin at his core, not the loud hero, but the one who held the pieces together when everything threatened to shatter. As he comforted her, Matlin's mind slipped to a memory, one of countless moments that had forged him into the man he was. Years ago, Elvine had stood in their cramped kitchen on a backwater moon, her voice trembling with anger as she argued with their eldest over a reckless choice. Something trivial now, lost to time, but sharp enough then to cut. The air had crackled with tension, words flying like shrapnel, until Matlin had stepped between them. He'd said nothing at first, just rested a hand on Elvine's shoulder and met her gaze with that steady look of his. She'd faltered, her fury dissolving into tears, and he'd pulled her close, letting her rage and sorrow spill against him until it burned out. Later, he'd spoken to their child, his voice quiet but firm, mending the rift without raising a shout. That was his way, absorbing the storm, redirecting it, keeping them whole. It wasn't the first time, nor the last. When their youngest had woken screaming from nightmares, Matlin was the one who sat by her bunk, a silent sentinel until her breathing eased. When credits ran dry and Elvin paced with worry, he'd taken her hands, his calm certainty a promise they'd find a way. He didn't need words to lead. His actions were his voice, his presence the glue that bound their fractured lives. The galaxy was a brutal place, but Matlin had made himself their shield, not with blades or blasters, but with the quiet, unshakable resolve that said, "I'm here and will endure." That role had never been clearer than now. Elvin's sobs quieted, her grip on him loosening as she drew strength from his stillness. She pulled back slightly, her face streaked with tears, and looked up at him. "I couldn't move, Madeline," she whispered, her voice brittle. "He was going to... I thought I'd lose everything." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch tender but deliberate. "You didn't," he said simply. "You fought, and I'll always be here when you can't." His words were sparse, but they carried the weight of a vow, one he'd lived out time and again, unspoken but etched into the fabric of their family. Amber hauled Calvin out from his hiding spot, his grip firm but reassuring. "You okay, kid?" Calvin nodded, still shaken. "I didn't do anything. I just hid." "You stayed alive," Amber said, his voice steady. "That's enough for now." Carvin joined them, wiping blood from his hands. "They're dead. Ship's undocked." Amber glanced around the hold, assessing the damage. "We've got some fried systems to fix. Those EMPs hit us hard. But we're only a couple jumps from our destination. We'll manage. Stoller, Provden, up front with me." Matlin emerged from the shadows, nodding grimly. "I'll get started on repairs." Amber turned to Carvin and Matlin, his tone serious. "We need to stay low from here on out. That news about Calvin being a human bomb, it's painted a target on our backs. No risks, no slip-ups." Carvin met his gaze, resolute. "We'll make it. Together." As the Silver Crescent pulled away from the pirate wreckage, Calvin stood beside Amber, watching the asteroid field fade into the distance. The fear hadn't left him, but with Amber's lessons and his family's strength, he felt a flicker of resolve, a belief that somehow they could outrun the shadows closing in.